Just dragging this emissive sphere through the environment always looks so cool. Just casting that nice blue light all over the scene. And there's not even a light attached to it, which is awesome. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Polygon Academy. My name is Tim, and it's actually been quite a while since I made a video, but I'm back. And today is actually a super special day because Epic just released the hands-on version, the early access of Unreal Engine 5. So Epic just released an awesome new demo showcasing a lot of the new tools and features inside of Unreal Engine 5. And I know there's a lot to dive into, but I really wanted to start with one of my favorite things that I saw ever since Unreal Engine 5 was announced and what they showcased, and that has to be Lumen. As you guys know, my background is in environments and lighting, so as soon as I saw this in their first initial demo, I was stoked. The less time you have to spend baking lighting and dealing with technical issues, the better. This seems absolutely amazing for viz deving on the fly and just focusing more of your time on being creative and artistic with your scenes. So in this tutorial, we're going to be taking a quick look at how to get Lumen set up and working in your scenes. If you are working with older content, the nice thing about Unreal Engine 5 is it's basically, UE 4.27. So you can port all of your old scenes and content into UE 5 and maybe relight them and start using Lumen to add that nice bounce light into your scene. So we're going to be going over the first few steps to get that enabled and working. It is very, plug and play right out of the box, which is great. I was really worried that it was going to be something like a very technical artist kind of tool set, but it seems super artist friendly in the few hours that I've been playing with it so far. I'm going to try and keep this super simple and straightforward. So regardless of whatever scene you're working with, it should be easy to follow along. So if you're excited for more tutorials from me, hit that thumbs up button. It lets me know that you enjoy the content, and let's dive right in. All right, so here we are in this quick example scene I've created. It's a very kind of gray box world. I find this mid-tone gray is actually going to be really useful for showcasing a lot of the features of Lumen, just because it's not going to be easy to get distracted by crazy textures or anything like that. Don't worry, we will be jumping into some, super nice, gorgeous arted scene in just a few minutes, where we'll take a look at some of the more other features in depth. But I think a scene like this is really going to help showcase exactly what Lumen is doing under the hood. And you're not going to get too distracted by, all some gorgeous visuals. It's going to be really focused on just the lighting. So in this super basic scene, if you look at my world outliner, I just have the most basic lighting setup. I'm using if I go outside the scene and let the exposure adjust, I'm just using their sky atmosphere, the volumetric clouds, a skylight, a directional light, and the exponential height fog to get those nice volumetric rays coming through the windows. And when I first loaded the scene up, it was actually completely black because Lumen wasn't working. So the first thing you want to do to get Lumen working, I think with their brand new UE5 example scene, it should work right out of the box. But if you are porting some older content, it might not actually be set up. So what you're going to want to do is go to Edit, Project Settings, not the editor preferences, the project settings, because Lumen is a project-based thing you have to turn on. And if we scroll down on the left-hand side here, what we're going to want to do is click on Rendering. And then if you scroll down, right here, Global Illumination, you're going to want to set this to Lumen. When I first opened the scene after updating it from a UE4 scene, it was set to None. So I just hit this drop down, set this to Lumen. And it also actually turns the reflection method to Lumen as well, because Lumen is also handling reflections now, which is really cool. But you just want to have these both set to Lumen, and you should be good to go. I had one instance on a different project where it didn't turn on right away, and all I had to do was just restart the editor, and next time I loaded up the scene, it worked fine. So that's pretty much all you have to do to get Lumen working. There is one other thing you're probably going to want to do. If you are using a post-process like me, I have a post-process that surrounds this interior to kind of set the exposure properly. You just might want to go into there and under Global Illumination, set this drop down to Lumen. You can see if I swap it back to the old screen space, oh, that's not too good. It doesn't look great because all the lighting is real time now, right? So this defaults back to using just like the movable skylight and stuff like that. So you start to get some of these weird artifacts. And then if I turn off Global Illumination completely, it just, without the baked lighting, it looks terrible. So we're going to fix that. Just switch it back to Lumen inside the post process. And now you see we get this gorgeous, nice bounce lighting. And if I fly around the scene, you can see the areas that aren't directly lit by the sun. Like you can see the bounce lighting hitting the floor there and bouncing onto this corner. But you can also see the areas that are more ambiently lit by the skylight have a cooler tone, which is really nice because you're picking up all of that nice color bounce from the more warm, saturated light from the sun. On my directional light here, can see if I turn this off, the scene goes pretty much black because it's no longer lighting up the actual sky atmosphere either. Like this fog right here is just the exponential height fog, which doesn't contribute to lumen. Not that I know of so far anyways. So if I turn on my sun, you'll now see that, it lights up the actual sky atmosphere, which is powering the skylight. Because without the directional light, there's nothing for the skylight to capture. So with light, when you're lighting with lumen, it's 99% of the time, it's going to be extremely important that you have, your skylight and your sunlight set up properly. And the sun is more important than ever now. So right now I have the directional light selected. If I wanted a bit more bounce light in this scene, there's 2 ways I could go about it. The first thing I could do is probably, just increase the power of my sunlight. This is going to have the effect of actually brightening the overall sky and the dome as well, which is going to, if you have exterior lighting, it might start to blow things out, or all of your highlights might start to get really, really bright and blown out. Which you might want that look, you might not. But I'm going to set this back to say 7 for the kind of more subdued interior lighting. But say I just wanted more bounce, like I wanted the light to fill the room a little bit more. It's the exact same as when you used to be able to bake lighting. You could take the setting of indirect lighting intensity down here, and you can turn this up, and that increases the overall bounciness of the light. So you can get really nice stylized looks with this if you really want the sense of like light just flooding a space. Or if you tone it down, you can still get that super nice bounce light, or you can also pretty much disable it as well if you want more of a moody kind of like noir contrasty look. I'm going to leave it set to 1 for this example scene. And if I press Control L to get that orbit gizmo for the directional light or the sunlight going, and start to move it around, you can see that all the bounce light and GI updates in real time with a little slight bit of a subtle fade as it catches up. But that's super, super cool. This is really nice. So we've taken a look at the directional light and how that really powers most of the lighting in your scene now. Next, we're going to take a quick look at the skylight and some of the settings for that. So I'm going to select my skylight here in the world outliner, go to the details panel. And the main thing you're going to want to do if you're using the sky atmosphere system when you're lighting your scenes with Lumen is to make sure that the real-time capture is turned on. Because the sky, whenever you're changing the position of the sun, is going to get vastly different colors inside of it. It's going to be more orange at sunset, more blue in the midday lighting. And if real-time capture isn't turned on, your skylight isn't going to capture those color updates. So your GI is not going to reflect that. So it's subtle, but it does make a huge difference in your scenes. Other than that, it works the exact same as normal. You can increase the intensity of your skylight if you want to kind of fill in your shadows a bit more. In general, leaving it at 1 seems to work pretty good. So now that we've taken a quick look at getting Lumen set up in your scene, as well as the heavy hitters of the sun and skylight, let's take a look at some of the other features of Lumen, such as how strongly colored objects in your scene can actually cast that color onto the environment through the way that light bounces around, as well as using emissive to light parts of your scene. So if I quickly fly over here into this other little kind of smaller room, you can see it's actually a lot darker than the main room, simply because there's getting more occlusion from the walls being closer together and only being one window, so less light is coming in here, which is really subtle, but really cool. I have this white cube here, and you can see the fact that the sun is hitting it dead on is acting as a reflector, and the light is actually hitting this and really bouncing strongly off back into the scene. So this is actually something that a lot of like photographers and stuff will do. They'll actually shine a super bright light or a flash at a white softbox and have that light bounce back onto the subject to get a really nice diffused light. So you can see here on the floor, it's less of a super strong highlight that you would have from a direct light, and it becomes a lot more of a kind of soft diffused light, which is really, really nice. And if I move this around, you can see it start to update. There is a bit of blotchiness as this updates, but also you have to keep in mind that this scene is just literally, I think, 50% gray materials on everything. So any lighting problems are going to be way, way more apparent than if this was on top of, say, a tile floor or, brick walls and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, the intensity of that bounce light changes as this gets closer and closer to the surfaces and as it hits more light. And same if I scale up the size of the object. If you look on the walls back over there, it definitely influences the power of the bounce light in the scene. So we have our cube selected. I'm going to hit Control Spacebar. This is the new hotkey for their, it pops up the content browser. You can choose to detach this and leave it on a second monitor if you like, but I absolutely love this functionality. The amount of times that I've, had to go digging through the content browser, but it's been hidden behind some other panels on my other monitor and stuff like that. It's been super annoying. So having this quick little pop out is great. I'm going to drop a blue material onto this cube. So it's pretty much just a 100% blue cube. And you can see that now that the sun, just in the way that the sunlight was coming through and hitting the white surface, which was super highly reflective and really bouncing that just pure light all over the room. The next thing we're going to look at is what happens if we put a glowing material on this cube and see how it can actually inject some nice fake bounce light into the scene, even though there's no actual light attached to it. So I'm going to go back into my content browser and just drop an emissive material onto it. If I open up this emissive material, right now it's literally just a color plugged into the emissive color with a multiplier, just an arbitrary number. If you actually increase this number or decrease it, I'll do that on my other monitor. But like if I just decrease that and hit apply, as the intensity of that emissive goes down, you can actually see the decrease in the amount of bounce light in the scene. So I'm going to set this back to 5, hit apply. And now as I move this cube around, you can see I can actually start to light up areas like this hallway. So yeah, as you see, like moving this super fast, you can kind of see one of the caveats of this system, how it doesn't instantly update. It does tend to leave this like streaking. It's a lot more noticeable depending on the object size and how intense the contrast is of this update. I think, under the hood, there's probably a probe irradiance system going on where the update, there's probably a setting that tells it however many milliseconds to update, something like that. I'm sure you can probably increase that and it will make Lumen a lot more expensive. And you can probably also decrease it if you're, having a very simple basic lighting setup to actually cut the cost of Lumen running in the background all the time. And we'll take a look at just how expensive some of this stuff is in a little bit. Another thing to note is actually the amount of light that the surface gives off is dependent on the object's size too. So if I actually scale this down, it's throwing off less light, even though I didn't actually increase or decrease the emissive value of that material. It's simply because there's a larger surface area throwing off more light. So that's something to note as well. You might have to have different emissive materials that you would apply to different objects based on the sheer amount of emissiveness on them, right? Like if you have a character with some small glowing lines and you want them to actually kind of light up your scene, if you're not sticking to physically accurate values, you might want to actually just pump up that intensity a little bit, simply because the surface area is really small. However, if you have like a large neon sign, you might actually need to take that and decrease the overall intensity to not have your emissive blow up the scene. And finally, before we leave this little scene here, let's take a run around as the mannequin so you can see how this all works, even on a skeletal mesh that's running around the scene. So you can see he does pick up all of that nice bounce light as well. And he even starts to take on some of the blue as I move just near the cube. So even though the cube has no actual light attached to it, it is coloring the character. He's throwing off some soft shadows from his feet. If you guys watched my emissive lighting tutorial in the past, you know how the volumetric light probes would kind of help with the soft shadowing to help ground characters and give that nice soft shadowing effect. I'm guessing something very similar is happening here to give the soft shadows from movable objects, even though there's not an actual shadow casting light right there. So before we move on to that medieval scene, we're going to take one last look at one of the settings here for Lumen, because like I said, any defects are going to really show up a lot more on these flat gray walls than they will in a fully arted scene. If I go and grab my post-process volume that's controlling the post-processing in this room and the overall environment, if I go down through here to the global illumination tab, you can see the method is already set to Lumen like we did in the beginning, but there's also the final gather quality settings. So the default, it's set to 1. If I put this to say, I think 0.25 is the lowest. Let's see if I put it it just defaults to 0.25 as the lowest. I'm not sure if this will come through the YouTube compression, but you can see that all of the bounce light has gotten a lot more blotchy. If I put this back to 1 or 0.5, it's kind of that middle ground. And if you start to increase it like 2 and 5, it does become a bit smoother, like barely noticeably smoother. But if I type in stat GPU into the console command, you can see that the Lumen probe gather is at a setting of 5 is actually costing 4 milliseconds, a little over 4 milliseconds. If I put it back down to 1, which is the default, it drops to 1.8, 1.9. If I put it to 0.25, it drops to about 1.3, 1.4. So not as much of a dramatic difference between 0.25 and 1, but a huge difference between 1 and 5, or as you go higher, it just gets exponentially more expensive. So you can see in this scene, Lumen is definitely the most expensive thing that's running. So as always, lighting artists, we love to hog the performance budget, and this is just another example of that. But you can see that there's the Lumen Screen Probe Gather, so that's the probes around the camera, I'm guessing. And then there is also the Lumen Scene Lighting, and there's the Lumen Reflections, the Lumen Radiance Cache. So there are like I think one, two, three overhead costs for Lumen that are running in the background, and it does definitely look like it is quite one of the more expensive things. So right now I'm running this on a RTX 2080, but depending on your video card, your actual cost might be a lot higher, or if you're running one of the new 3000 series cards, it'd probably be a bit lower. So depending on your target hardware, you're probably going to want to adjust this. If you're just doing it for an art scene, yeah, I'm sure you can crank it up. That's fine. But if you are actually developing a game for something like maybe a console, you're probably going to end up turning the overall quality down slightly to get it to save a little bit of cost. Whenever the tech artist comes to your desk and says, "Hey, you have to turn that off or turn it down," that's usually what will happen. Like I said, as lighters, we love to hog the performance budget and just go crazy and make things look as beautiful as possible. But at the end of the day, if you are developing games, you do have to take technical performance into account. So we're going to hop over into that medieval scene, and we're going to take a look at some of the stuff works in an actual arted up environment with materials and textures, now that you've seen how the stuff works more kind of cleanly on top of a gray box environment. Before we hop over to that next scene, if you're enjoying the video and you're not subscribed already, take 2 seconds, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell. It really does help the channel out. If you're interested in stuff like Unreal Engine, environment art, lighting, the game industry in general, this is definitely the place for you. All right, so here we are in this kind of medieval scene. This is a scene off the Unreal Engine marketplace. I believe Epic might have made it free either for a period of time, or it might be in the permanently free collection now. I'll leave a link to it regardless in the YouTube description below. I definitely didn't make all of the art in the scene, but I have been using it to do some lighting experiments and work on some personal project stuff in here. So I figured I'd kind of continue with that in UE5. And like I said before, I was working on this scene, the lighting stuff that I was doing in UE 4.26, and I just updated it by loading the project in UE5, and it just asked me if I wanted to convert it. And so far, so good. No major hitches, nothing exploded, and it seems to be working perfectly, which is great. So again, in the scene, I have just the sky atmosphere, have some volumetric clouds, a very similar lighting setup to the test world I was working in before. Again, you can see just dragging this emissive sphere through the environment always looks so cool, just casting that nice blue light all over the scene. And there's not even a light attached to it, which is awesome. So looking at this scene, you can see we have some volumetric clouds in the sky, and those actually do have an impact in the overall amount of bounce light coming as well. We're going to go through this here and quickly kind of disable all the components back to the bare bones, like starting with just the directional light, and you'll see kind of what each component adds to the scene and how that impacts the way that Lumen is kind of kicking off light. All right, so let's go through and kind of disable each of these elements, starting with the volumetric clouds, the skylight, the sky atmosphere, and even the directional light. So we're just left with pretty much this, the glowing blue orb. Super cool. But let's turn on the directional light. And you can see, even with just the directional light and no skylight, it's actually starting to fill in quite a lot of the scene with the bounce light. Obviously, it looks kind of weird that there's no sky color or anything like that. We're missing the sky atmosphere. But you can see just from the directional, there's already kicking off a ton of bounce, which is really cool. If we turn on the sky atmosphere, that's going to fill in, our background. Turn on the skylight, and you can see how Lumen kind of fades that update in. Turn it off. That's just directional light and bounce light. Here's directional light, bounce light, and the skylight, taking the contribution of the sky into effect. And actually, you'll really notice it in this area here. If I turn on the volumetric clouds, it adds even more kind of like fill light to the scene, which you have to remember is because the light is hitting the clouds and scattering even more, it's actually acting like a gigantic softbox. So your clouds in your scene will actually really dramatically impact the amount of bounce light, and probably how you're going to want to kind of tune your light settings in your scene, because the shadows here might be too dark, but then all of a sudden you add the volumetric clouds to a scene, and they're scattering a lot more light throughout. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're like, why is there so much bounce light in my scene? And you have like a really cloudy sky going on with the volumetric clouds. That could be part of the reason. So I find it really handy to go through and just, kind of toggle off each element and see exactly how it's impacting the scene. Another thing you can do is up here under the show, you can go to visualize and then just toggle this little tick box right here, Lumen Global Illumination. So this shows exactly everything that Lumen is kind of painting with the global illumination. So this is 100% the GI in the scene right now. There's no direct lighting. There's no, you can see there's no harsh shadows from the sun or anything like that. This is all just the GI. It's super cool to fly around and look at your scenes like this. It almost gives you that kind of clay render look if you have your, a more diffused lighting setup going on. Really, really nice. I know I remember back in the day when I was learning 3D, getting a scene like this all modeled out and then rendering it in 3D Studio Max for like 12 hours with just the skylight to get that kind of clay render look. And now it's kind of funny. You can take a screenshot of this just by toggling one thing in about 2 seconds. So it just shows you just how far we've come in terms of lighting and how far real time has come. And then the other thing you can do is toggle the Lumen scene. And I found this actually super interesting. So this, I think, is what Lumen is kind of seeing and projecting the colors that it does the bounce light from. Because I think it would be probably far too complicated to, per pixel kind of bounce light off of every surface. So I think what it's doing is kind of constructing a super low poly or HLOD version of the scene almost, where it blurs everything out and kind of takes the main color values and contrast and uses that to calculate the bounce light and bounce color, because I'm guessing it's just a lot cheaper. So I found this super cool when I just toggled this in, and it almost looks like an old PS1 game, but it looks like this is kind of the geometry that Lumen is interacting with those probes, and that makes sense as it simplifies everything and just probably takes a lot of computational time off. So here we are. Here's another example I wanted to show of. I have a rectangular light, again, just kind of beaming on this blue cube. And you can see that the blue light is reflecting, or just the neutral light is hitting the blue cube and bouncing up onto the undersides of these wooden beams. But here's one of the things where I kind of think that Lumen is doing a bit of screen space stuff as well, because you can see with this example, if I rotate the camera upwards and the cube leaves the screen, that all of that blue bounce light disappears. Very similar to how some of the stuff with their old SSGI used to work, is when like a glowing object or something, a bright highlight would be off of the screen, all of that SSGI would kind of disappear. And I guess maybe for smaller, more localized lights, it kind of uses the screen space to drive a lot of that color bounce. So if I go up and down, you can kind of see that effect. I thought that was pretty interesting. And it's the same as if I toggle it on and off. However, the actual bounce light from that light remains. So if I toggle that light on and off, you can actually see that the bounce light is still coming up and hitting those struts. It's just the color transmission is dependent on what's on the screen. So that's super interesting, I found. And if we fly into this interior here, you can see another example of using the emissive lighting and just how accurate it is. It's underneath this kind of wooden bridge or wooden walkway, and it's not just bleeding through. It's pretty accurate in the way it blocks the light. In the past, I've worked on other games where you kind of have your probe density, and depending on that, how accurate it would be, you would have a lot of light bleeding. And right out of the box, I think they probably tuned the settings for something that's kind of in that middle ground between performance and getting rid of a lot of the light leaking, which is cool. Again, you can see as the cube leaves the screen on the underside of these kind of the railing here, the GI intensity kind of goes away. You can see it fade in and out a little bit, but the overall actual bounce or color coming from this cube, the light from it still does remain overall, even when it's off screen. But if I drag this up, again, you can see it's now kind of like really all of that light transmission is blocked by this walkway, which is really cool. I was totally expecting it to bleed through and kind of just be more of an average smooth solution, but it looks like with emissive lighting, it actually is super accurate, which is really, really cool. And finally, before we break, I guess one of the things we could do is probably, you can move the sun around and all that fun stuff. But if we put this scene to be more of like pretty much night based, then a lot of these effects would be a lot more pronounced. Now you can see, the sun's gone down and it's pretty much just a black sky. So it's mainly the local lights and the emissive that are still lighting the scene, because there's no, stardome or anything like that to add some subtle kind of, GI from the night sky into the scene. I haven't set up the moon or anything like that. So these effects become a lot more pronounced. So this actually kind of reminds me a lot of the times that I spent in like night markets in Thailand and stuff like that, where you get those harsh neons kind of like lighting up a lot of the tarps and stuff like that. So this is kind of a cool example where you notice the light transmission a lot more during the day, but however, like I said, that effect does become a lot more pronounced. So I think with night scenes, there's going to be a little bit more having to fake stuff, depending on how noticeable it is. I mean, a lot of screen space stuff in games you don't even notice anyways, because you're running around, you're shooting people and stuff like that. It's only when you really stop and look at it that becomes that apparent. But you can see that, even this rectangle light right here is throwing off quite a bit of bounce, which is really cool, filling in that surrounding area. And finally, if we come back to this, the big monster blue ball here, and like I said, remember, based on an object size, we can actually just really start to illuminate things. So you can get some really, really cool looks just by lighting with emissive, which is awesome. So I quickly reverted things back to my basic lighting setup. I know in the beginning I talked about with the skylight, if you're using the sky atmosphere system and changing the time of day and stuff like that, you're going to want to have this box that says real-time capture ticked. But there's no reason why you still can't use a bit more of an old school method of lighting your scenes, of say using an actual HDRI image. And actually, I'll show that quickly right here. So I'm going to turn off the real-time capture. Let's change this to SLS specified cube map. And you can see it's going to get a lot darker. I have just an HDRI skies plugged in. And right now, because the rest of my scene is using physical units, I'm going to have to really, and it's not capturing the dome with this image on there, I'm going to have to really crank up the intensity. So I set this to something like 10,000. You see it starts to fill in the scene. And this is actually one of the things I was going to show is you can kind of see how Lumen updates. It kind of fades across the board. Hopefully that comes through the YouTube compression, but it's like this kind of checkered updating a little bit. But as you can see, it works perfectly fine. Just using some of these different methods with your skylight. You don't have to always use the Unreal sky and atmospheric clouds. You can, like in this example right now, I'm using both, right? I'm using the sky atmosphere to drive the colors in the clouds with the sun. However, if I wanted to have a different look from my kind of ambient fill light, rather than everything being, if I switch this back to the real-time capture, set it to 1. So you can see all of this bounce light is adding a lot of warm tones to the scene, which is actually kind of like physically accurate in how it would look. But say you wanted to actually cool down your skylight and you didn't want to just kind of change your light color or something like that. By using a kind of a cooler overall ambient HDRI, you can actually kind of divorce those things and have a little bit more control as well, depending on the creative looks you want. So if I actually go in here now and just hide my sun, you can see we can get a lot more of that kind of just really kind of overcast look. And again, in this situation, because the sun's gone, it's no longer lighting up the sky atmosphere. You probably want to actually put this HDRI on a dome, which means, again, if you're doing custom painted skies and stuff like that, rather than going for more of a system-based thing using the physical sky, you can totally still do that and have really nice, beautiful matte painted sky domes. And then you can see, if I open up this HDRI, you can actually see, there's a super bright spot where the sun would be. And if I change the source cube map angle, you can actually see that Lumen is taking that into account too, as it kind of scrolls through the scene. Like right now on technically from the HDRI, the bright spot would be basically facing the camera. And then as I rotate it around, it starts to bounce light off of the buildings and fill in over here as well. So totally a viable method still to use HDRIs or custom painted, matte paintings and stuff like that for your skies. they work with Lumen as well. All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed that video. I'm back in action. I know you guys have been asking me in all the comments of all of my other videos, when am I coming back? When am I making more videos? And I just saw the UE5 presentation today, and I knew I had to sit down and quickly make a video because it's just so exciting. And I hope to dive into it even more in the future. Hopefully you guys can now get up and running and use Lumen to light your scenes and have some awesome results for yourselves. I'm super stoked to play around with this more. Let me know down in the comments below what you're going to use it for. Are you going to make some cyberpunk scene? Or are you going to do something completely different and wacky outside of the box? I'm always happy to read about you guys' projects, and that gets me excited and inspired as well. I know 2020 was an absolutely insane year for pretty much everyone on this planet, so I really do hope all of you guys are happy and healthy and doing well, and excited to learn more about Unreal in the future. So as always, make sure you're subscribed, hit the thumbs up button, and leave me a comment below. It really does help out. And thank you for watching. See you in the next video.